This whole series is about combining Bill Traylor and Thornton Wilder's idea on his play by the skin of our teeth. I have a friend, Cornelia Tischmacher, who was talking to me about had I read by the Skin of Our Teeth by Thornton Wilder, his play. And it sort of told the story of this family surviving every atrocity you can possibly think, the Ice Age, war, famine. But the idea of the play specifically is also incorporating the idea of the viewer. So periodically, as the actors are speaking, they then go back and speak to the audience. Also, set movement also becomes part of the dialogue too. So that's what I want to try and recreate by combining the trailer images with this idea of set movement and placement and how they're specifically going to look. So this particular piece is called In the Land of the Blind, the Blue Eye Man is King. So the idea was sort of combine these ideas of history and experiences, the premise of where we're at now, even with politics now specifically. So the idea for me was Moses would be played by Don Quixote, but Don Quixote specifically, his horse is actually the one who's amputated. So I wanted to play up ideas of a conversation on amputation, you know, the relationship of you have men and women coming back from Iraq who are going through this experience of losing a limb. So that was the idea of combining the sort of like the horse in itself having the stilt specifically. The idea is just this overall free-for-all. I mean, we have an idea of a context of a desert, so the interpretation for the viewer is to sort of get an experience, but then make their own decision based on maybe recognizable images, or then kind of source to the image. That's sort of how all the work has always kind of worked. So these ideas of these images that sort of translate into our mind, and then how can we then correlate these images back to a present when they're represented in another context. I want to start with this particular image, which is called The Golden Touch, and it's about Thelma Golden. I was really nervous about doing this particular piece because I didn't want to create the context of Thelma into a caricature. So I kind of wanted to sort of deal like as if you're doing cave markings or markings on a wall to sort of tell a story. P is sort of the listening ear of Peter Norton, that idea. Or the idea of her leaving the Whitney Museum, the crutch. The idea of the pointing aspect of the truth of how she sort of bring in this whole, what I consider the new young black syndicate who's sort of come into the context of the art world right now. This particular piece is called Generational Paper Cups. And generational paper cups has to do with whether it's a paper cup at an AA meeting, whether it's a paper cup at a methadone clinic, whether it's a paper cup of drinking a cup of coffee. What is this thing about the context of generational situations of abuse? The whole series by the Skin of Our Teeth, which I'm planning to do the installation, I feel I want to put the golden touch at the very beginning portion of the big 15-foot painting on one of the main walls at Dun & Brown Contemporary in Dallas, Texas. And then this particular piece will be at the front portion of the piece, sort of following in. It's like a visual aspect of looking at the piece from the walking man in, and then the pointing woman at the other axis, which is the golden touch and generational paper cups. So it's the idea, again, seeing theatrics in the aspect of how you're presenting the work as compared to just installing the work as separate entities. This particular piece is a two-dog piece together. It's called When the Lipstick Showed. I didn't have no roadmap for this love affair. So it's an experience of falling in love and what it just means to fall in love, no matter who you are. This one piece is an image that has Icarus, and then the overall images of people's interpretations, ideas, thoughts, that kind of thing. The two dogs kind of be playfully work with each other. This particular piece, actually, we saw this initially. So sort of dealing a little bit with the war, but also dealing with the history of slavery. Too. So it's like this idea of how history sort of become these things. Certain images like the runaway slave, people are sort of searching out, finding, coming to the point of, you know, it's just the different ideas. This particular piece is called Compounded Interest, and has a little bit to do with reparations. Kind of borrowed the text from Jean-Michel's text. Jean-Michel put a text with Origin of Cotton. It's Origin of Cotton piece, so I sort of combine it, but the anvil itself being that hard rocking conversation, still the same idea. There are a group of women that kind of surround the shoulder, sort of wearing your love on your shoulder. So it's the experience of my love affairs, or the lack of love affairs, or the people I've always fell in love with, but never could get it, but became close friends with. So it's like that idea. So again, it's the pure context on envying pure love and what love is about, but always feeling like this sort of frustration between my love for always wanting to work all the time and do paintings and just work as compared to getting to an actual relationship. Traylor was the gem, was the pure gem of finding this idea of these concepts, and the act of him choosing to start making works at age 86 years of age is a real thing. And I went to the Studio Museum about 2 years ago. There's a show on Bill Traylor in Edmonton. So when I decided for work on this next series by the Skin of Our Teeth, this next series, I sort of wanted to look at specific works of Traylor. I looked at the book that was done by the Student Museum on Evanson and Traylor. These Traylor images, which are telling you a context of a story that's obviously in the context of Traylor's head, but you can create something else from them. So they're beautiful. They're unbelievable. Like this beautiful poster board paint right on the cardboard, straight on the paper, beautifully translucent, but at the same time very dense. It's like it blew everything that any teacher ever told me about this idea of you can't use poster board paint on cardboard and it's not archival and all that stuff. It basically, you see these paintings and they're fantastic and they're gorgeous. It's not coming from its way of thinking process of ideas of how to present them, present the work, present the materials, then do it. He just does it. And that's the act for me with folk artists. They just do it. So 1972, came here from Canada, and my parents were of Barbadian descent, and basically from there kind of grew up in Coney Island, New York City. My brother and I were latchkey kids, so for the most part it was the idea of dialoguing from the fact that there was not a whole lot of television to watch, but at the same time dialoguing with everything that was happening in the street. I remember it was two different worlds. My parents were of Barbadian descent, and this idea of them coming to New York City became a different kind of resonance. It was a different place. New York in the 70s was like bombed out, you know. It was like block, bomb out, block, bomb out, which was just dilapidated buildings. The idea of Jean-Michel is that resonance for me. Jean-Michel is New York for me. But Jean-Michel sort of represents to me the idea of taking a step forward and not giving a shit and doing what you gotta do. To translate conversations on colonialism, translating ideas on history, politics, ideas of everything, but at the same time that mark becomes not a mark that's made in thought but made in jest. I was influenced by Mad Magazine, influenced by these images, influenced by pulp fiction images, all these things. Growing up on West 36th Street in Coney Island, the community itself had been Hasidic Jewish, and at the same time it also was Puerto Rican, it was Korean, it was Italian, it was a big mix of people living there in the 70s. At the time, kids and I used to, when we were kids, we used to, you know, bother this old man who had a black hat and long beard and, you know, long locks, and used to bother him. So I went and knocked on his door and said, "What do you want?" He got really upset. And I just said, "What do you do? What are those books you carry on your thing?" And he says, "It's the Torah, and you'll never be able to touch it." But it was interesting. Over time, we worked up a friendship and a relationship, and he sort of taught me these ideas of these books. You know, what is the conversation of the Torah? How is the Torah carried? Who gets to teach a Torah? And yet he's teaching a young black child, young black girl, about these stories, but he's left there. You know, I was a young kid going to Catholic school. So to me, I would bring the ideas that he would tell me to Catholic school during, you know, if we were doing, we were doing our confirmation, for example. I would bring issues, say, "Well, you're wrong, because how about this?" So that's why I always have a tendency to bring them in. All the things that he had taught me, everything he had said, everything he had presented as ideas and made me think, which he said also question the context on religion. Also question me, and also question yourself. Kind of went back to Canada for a while, and basically went to school, to a private school at Russell Lake College. And after there, I came back stateside and went to school at Columbia College in Chicago. I went to Columbia College initially because I wanted to be a screenwriter. Initially, I did take some drawing classes, specifically because I wanted to be able to draw better for doing sort of screen scopes. At the time when I was at Skowhegan, I remember I was doing the kind of all over Basquiat thing, still sort of appropriating the images and combining this idea of what the fuck, I'm gonna do it my way. And Nan Goldin came into the studio, and when she came into the studio, she said, "Oh, perfect, this is great. You know, you do a whole Basquiat thing, perfect. You're perfect, you'll work right into the art world of the conversation. But the reality of the situation, you're black, you're female, and they'll use you up, and this is the dialogue. You either have to make a choice about what you're gonna do with this work. How about those drawings over there?" That dialogue was fast, quick, and weird, because when she pointed to the drawings over there, it was like an old, you know, school desk that came, I had the desk part that opened up and down. Inside were a bunch of drawings that I, before she came, rushed and shoved in so she wouldn't be able to see those drawings, which were a little more private. And she had said, "Oh, those drawings over there," because some of the guys were still sticking out. So, of course, it's almost like opening up, you know, the Pandora box and like pulling out your own, all those drawings, and I was presenting them, and she said, "This is your context." And she was right. And Nan Goldin was definitely formed in that dialogue. And Jessica Stockholder also, and Jacob Lawrence, who also said, "Move to the next context." After Skowhegan, I went to Tyler School of Art, got my MFA. From there, I came to New York in '99, and I applied to the Student Museum of Art program. I didn't get in the first round, but I went to a program at the Bronx Museum called the Access Zone, and you could meet with the New York curator, and I met with Christine Kim of the Studio Museum of Harlem. And Christine Kim, Thelma Golden, and Larry Sims were the new group of people coming into the Studio Museum, transforming the new dialogue from where it once was, so that they were going to bring a whole new context. So when I met Christine, she told me about a show that they were working on, that Thelma was working on specifically, which was called Freestyle. So Freestyle was sort of the implement of sort of presenting a community show. Then there was the show, Freestyle, which was probably sort of like a debutante ball kind of thing being presented to the New York art world, and that's what it really was. And then I applied about 2 years later to the Studio Museum AIR program. And at the studio program, they basically give you a space to work in, a stipend to be able to work. The fact that I had a great stipend and I could use that money and be able to do something beyond what I would usually do, that's when I started working with big birch panel pieces. So this piece is called 70-30 Split, which was sort of about the kind of relationship that was happening, the gentrification that was happening in Harlem specifically. And around sort of like the context of 70% of the population was renting, while 30% was pure ownership. So I wanted to play off these ideas. So I combined things of the history of Slick Rick, LL Cool J, sort of bringing the plumage of the idea of the hat itself back in, the whole thing. Quentin Tarantino's movie Jackie Brown, where Samuel L. Jackson's wearing the hat, a mirroring image between the taxi driver and the guy in the back. The taxi driver may have a context of where he is from, but he's actually a CEO, where the taxi driver's from Port Morel, which is the porting place in Cuba where people are leaving. I mean, it becomes these things of telling the history, but also they sort of have this Catholicism dipping image that sort of stands above it. Two smaller drawings were sort of how the beginning of the process would happen with the overall big panel pieces. This one's called Baby We Were Born to Run, and that kind of thing, and then this one was Pushing the Ideology. And it was sort of these ideas of combining image and things onto the kind of cutout images. Guernica came to me in relation to an image that was sort of put in a makeshift frame, that my mother had put an image of Guernica. It was much smaller, like 4 by 6, into a makeshift frame that I looked at my entire life. It sort of sat between the pantry area and the kitchen. I wanted to look at this idea of Guernica, not so much to inform us about what we're dealing with now with the war, but more to deal with more of my, going back to my formative years and looking at my early history of looking at work. I had been working with Roebling Hall at the time, and so then the installation process for me became about inviting friends and curators and people to come by the space, come here to the studio, and I had basically cut out small versions of the space and silhouetted them in black so that we could lay them on a piece of canvas and then rearrange them. Friends of mine such as Christine Kim, Sarah Lewis, Azolda Bremar, different people came by, and I allowed them to reposition the piece itself so we could look at it. So it became almost like collaboratively. So allowing them to reposition the piece allowed me to take an idea of what I thought of the image. When they would leave, I would take a digital image of the piece to sort of get a sense of and play them off each other. So the idea of allowing the collaborative act of people who I respected in terms of their curation. I'm always hoping that there's going to come a point where folk art and conceptual art and all the things that become these one things get blended, and there's no difference. You can't see the difference between any of them. For me, the idea of going in real time and working with specific artists, whether it be looking at Jean-Michel, looking at Pollock, looking at Warhol, looking at Pablo Picasso, I mean, looking at these people specifically in their work, I needed to dive in head first. But I think that's part of being able to get to that point. As an artist, I feel I'm young, and I feel like if I don't look and really appropriate and look at these images specifically and really get a sense of what they're about, and then just dive into the concept and then say, this is my idea, it completely loses its place into any feeling of where I want to go. I think by the time I'm 65, then I'll get to that point of understanding a new idea of my own work.